Welcome to our deep dive into Freedom from the Known
By J. Krishnamurti.
by J. Krishnamurti.
Yeah.
We've got a pretty fascinating book on our hands
Me
today.
too.
It's actually compiled from some of his previously unpublished talks.
It really is a unique collection. You can feel the energy of those live audiences as Krishnamurti challenges them to think differently.
Exactly, and that's what we're going to do today.
Yeah.
Our mission is to uncover the gems of wisdom hidden in these talks and explore how they can help us break free from, well, everything we think we know.
That's right.
Krishnamurti talks about shaking off societal conditioning
Yeah.
and achieving real inner freedom. And I'm curious to see what that looks like in practice.
It's a radical idea, isn't it? Not just questioning what we believe, but questioning the very structures of thought itself.
Right from the beginning,
Yeah.
Krishnamurti points out something I think we can all relate to, that deep-seated human longing for something more than just, material success
Right.
and everyday pleasures.
Yeah.
He observes that throughout history, people have sought something deeper, something beyond what our minds can easily grasp, something that can't be disturbed by the constant ups and downs of life. Have you ever felt that kind of longing?
Absolutely. And what's so interesting is how Krishnamurti challenges the traditional approaches to fulfilling this longing. He argues that following saviors, clinging to rigid ideals, or trying to live by strict codes, all of these things actually limit our thinking
Oh, wow.
and ultimately breed violence.
He uses this analogy of being spoon-fed by authorities, and it really struck me.
Yeah.
Think about it. Teachers' books,
Right.
even revered figures, we often rely on them to tell us what's right and wrong, how to live, what to believe.
And that reliance on external sources, Krishnamurti argues, prevents us from developing original clear thought. It's like we become dependent on someone else to tell us what to think instead of exploring those deeper questions for ourselves.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting. Krishnamurti doesn't just stop at critiquing those outward authorities. He takes it a step further and says we need to reject all authority,
Wow.
even the authority we create within ourselves.
Okay.
He suggests that even our accumulated knowledge,
Right.
past experiences, and even our own opinions can become a form of conditioning
Oh, interesting.
that clouds our perception.
What's fascinating here is that he's asking us to question everything, even our own deeply held beliefs. He's suggesting that real freedom starts with breaking free from all conditioning, both the external influences and the internal structures we've built up over time.
So if the key to real change is breaking free from all this conditioning, how do we even begin to recognize those deeply ingrained patterns within ourselves?
That's where Krishnamurti introduces this idea of conditioning as a core obstacle to freedom.
Okay.
He points out that we're shaped by so many influences: our race, religion, nationality, family, culture. The list goes on and on. And most of the time, we're completely unaware of how these influences are shaping our thoughts, feelings, and even our reactions to everyday situations.
He suggests that many of us live in these fragments of ourselves. Think about it at work. We might be one way at home, another. And in relationships, yet another version of ourselves. It makes you wonder, are we ever truly whole, truly ourselves in any of those spaces?
That's a powerful question, isn't it? And Krishnamurti uses this really vivid story to illustrate how easily we can miss what's happening right in front of us because we're so caught up in our own internal worlds. It's about a chauffeur in India who accidentally runs over a goat while driving.
Oh my goodness.
But here's the catch. His passengers are so engrossed in a conversation about awareness that they don't even notice.
Wow, that's a striking image.
Yeah.
It really highlights how easy it is to become disconnected from our immediate experience.
Exactly. And that disconnection is often a result of our conditioning of those unconscious patterns that are running the show behind the scenes.
So if we're essentially sleepwalking through life, reacting to situations based on our conditioning, how do we wake up? Krishnamurti says the key is to become aware of our conditioning. But how do we actually do that?
He suggests that it starts with observation. Can you observe your own reactions, your own thought patterns without judgment or condemnation? It's not about blaming yourself for being conditioned, but simply becoming aware of those influences that are shaping your experience.
So instead of asking, why am I like this, it's more about simply noticing, oh, this is how my conditioning is showing up in this moment.
Exactly. And in that simple act of observation, something begins to shift.
Wow.
We start to create a little space between ourselves and our reactions. And in that space, there's a possibility for freedom.
So let's bring this back to the listener's experience.
Yeah.
Imagine feeling totally responsible for your world, not in a blaming way,
Right.
but in a way that empowers you to see the power of your own conditioning. What would shift for you? How would your approach to challenges change if you saw them as opportunities to become more aware of those ingrained patterns.
That's the kind of radical self-responsibility Krishnamurti is talking about. It's not about guilt or blame, but about recognizing the incredible power we have to shape our own experience. And that recognition is the first step towards real freedom.
Now, Krishnamurti doesn't stop there. He goes on to talk about another major trap that keeps us from experiencing true joy,
Okay.
the trap of pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
He argues that our society is structured around seeking pleasure, but that this pursuit inevitably leads to sorrow and fear. It sounds a bit paradoxical, doesn't it?
It does, but it makes sense when you look at how Krishnamurti breaks down the mechanics of pleasure.
Okay.
He describes 4 stages: perception, sensation, contact, and desire.
Okay.
Let's take a simple example. You see a delicious piece of cake.
Okay, I'm with you. I love cake. What happens next?
First, there's the perception. You see the cake and all its deliciousness. Then comes the sensation. You might imagine how it tastes, the sweetness, the texture.
Yeah, now I'm really feeling it.
Then there's contact. Maybe you take a bite and experience that creamy frosting and moist cake melting in your mouth. And finally, desire arises. You want more of that cake. You crave that pleasurable experience again.
And that's where the problem comes in, right?
Exactly. Thought takes over and turns that fleeting moment of pleasure into an idea, an abstraction. We get attached to the memory of that pleasure and spend our energy trying to recapture it.
Yeah.
But of course, it never quite lives up to the original experience.
Think about a time you really craved a repeat experience.
Uh-huh.
That amazing vacation.
Right.
That delicious meal. That incredible concert. Was it ever truly the same?
That's the point Krishnamurti is making. We
Yep.
spend so much time chasing after these fleeting moments of pleasure,
Right.
but that chasing is what creates suffering. We become slaves to our desires instead of experiencing the fullness of the present moment.
Krishnamurti then connects this endless pursuit of pleasure to our deep-seated self-concern, which he sees as the root of many fears.
Uh-huh.
The need for approval, the craving for status, the desperate clinging to beliefs.
Right.
He suggests that all of this stems from a fear of not being enough, of losing ourselves.
And he uses a very poignant example to illustrate this: the difference in how society treats a citizen who has a position of respect versus one who doesn't.
Oh, interesting.
The one with status is given preferential treatment, while the one without it is often overlooked or dismissed. It highlights how much of our sense of self-worth is tied to external validation.
And that craving for validation,
Yeah.
for external markers of success,
Uh-huh.
is ultimately rooted in fear, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And that fear, Krishnamurti argues, often manifests as aggression towards others and even towards ourselves.
So how do we break free from this cycle of fear and aggression?
Well, Krishnamurti suggests that we need to understand the nature of fear itself. He says it's often rooted in the past in memories of painful experiences, or in the future in worries about what might happen.
So we're either haunted by the ghosts of yesterday or paralyzed by anxieties about tomorrow. No wonder we can't find peace in the present moment.
Exactly. And those thoughts about the past and future prevent us from being fully present,
Right.
which is the only place where true freedom can be found.
He offers this powerful analogy that really resonated with me. To live with a living thing such as fear requires a mind and heart that have no conclusion and can therefore follow every movement of fear.
Mm.
It's like he's suggesting that we need to learn to dance with our fears, to observe them without judgment, to understand them without trying to contain or suppress them.
It's a beautiful image, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it points to the need for a kind of radical openness, a willingness to experience fear without all our usual defenses, because it's in that direct encounter with fear, without all our usual defenses, that we can begin to understand its true nature and perhaps even transcend it.
This all seems to be pointing towards Krishnamurti's concept of true freedom.
Yeah.
And he makes it very clear that it's not about being free from something, like pain or fear or limitations.
Right.
He says it's about a state of complete solitude within. Now, that might sound a bit lonely,
Yeah.
but I think there's more to it than that, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's important to understand that this solitude is not about isolation or withdrawing from the world. It's about being free from the burdens of the past, from all the accumulated knowledge, experiences, and conditioning that shape our perception. Krishnamurti uses this incredibly evocative image to be alone, totally alone, not belonging to any family, any nation, any culture, any particular continent. There is that sense of being an outsider. The man who is completely alone in this way is innocent, and it is this innocence that frees the mind from sorrow.
Wow, that's powerful.
Yeah.
It's like he's describing a state of pure potentiality, a state of being completely unburdened by the weight of the past.
Exactly. And that freedom from the known, that innocence, is what opens the door to true love.
Because for Krishnamurti, true love is not possessive, demanding, or based on pleasure.
He actually makes a very thought-provoking statement about this in this torn desert world. There is no love because pleasure and desire play the greatest roles, and it challenges us to really look at our own experiences with love and ask ourselves, are we truly loving or are we simply seeking gratification?
And this brings us to another key aspect of Krishnamurti's teachings, the nature of thought itself. He's pretty radical here, arguing that thought is inherently limited
Yeah.
and incapable of solving our most fundamental human problems.
He tells this wonderful story about a religious teacher who gives a profound sermon that's inspired by a simple observation of a bird on a windowsill. It beautifully illustrates how much richer and more direct experience is compared to intellectualizing.
So are you saying that instead of thinking about life,
Yes.
we should be directly experiencing it?
Exactly. And to do that, Krishnamurti says we need to cultivate silence, not the absence of external noise, but the cessation of that internal dialogue, the constant chatter of the mind. He calls it inward solitude.
I love that phrase,
Yeah.
inward solitude.
Yeah.
It's such a beautiful way to describe that state of inner stillness.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, the idea of completely silencing my mind sounds pretty daunting. My thoughts are always racing, especially in today's world where we're constantly bombarded with information and stimulation. Is it even possible to find that kind of quiet amidst all the chaos?
That's a question a lot of people have, and Krishnamurti acknowledges that it's not easy, but he emphasizes that silence is not something you can achieve through effort or willpower. It's not about forcing your mind to be quiet.
Okay.
That just creates more tension and resistance.
So it's not about trying to control our thoughts.
Exactly. It's more about creating the right conditions for silence to arise naturally.
Okay.
And that involves becoming aware of the whole structure of thought, how it arises, how it operates, how it perpetuates itself.
So instead of fighting against our thoughts, we need to observe them with a sense of curiosity and detachment.
Precisely. Krishnamurti encourages us to pay attention to our thoughts without judgment or condemnation, simply noticing them as they arise and pass away, like clouds moving across the sky.
That's a beautiful image, instead of getting caught up in the storm clouds of our thoughts.
Right.
We can learn to watch them pass by without getting swept away. But how does that actually translate into everyday life?
Well, one of the key takeaways for me is that real change doesn't begin with trying to fix our problems or improve ourselves. It starts with understanding how our minds create those problems in the first place.
So it's not about trying to become a better version of ourselves, but about seeing through the illusion of the separate self altogether.
Exactly, because Krishnamurti says that the me that we think we are, that collection of thoughts, memories, beliefs, and experiences, is actually just a mental fabrication.
And it's this fabricated sense of self that causes so much suffering. It's what drives us to compare ourselves to others, to crave approval, to fear rejection, to feel insecure and inadequate.
And all of that striving, that seeking for something outside of ourselves to make us feel whole and complete is ultimately futile, because true fulfillment, as Krishnamurti points out, can only be found within.
So it sounds like the key is to stop identifying so strongly with our thoughts and emotions, to recognize that they're not who we truly are.
Exactly, and that's where the practice of mindfulness can be so helpful. It's about learning to observe our thoughts and feelings without judgment, to simply notice them as they arise and pass away without getting caught up in them.
Krishnamurti also talks about the importance of self-knowledge in this section, but he's very clear that it's not about accumulating information about yourself. It's about seeing yourself as you actually are in this very moment without any distortion or illusion.
It's about dropping the masks, the personas, the stories we tell ourselves and others about who we are, and just being present with the raw, unfiltered experience of ourselves.
That sounds incredibly vulnerable. It's like he's asking us to look in the mirror without flinching, to see ourselves in all our imperfections and complexities.
It can be challenging for sure, but Krishnamurti suggests that it requires a profound sense of humility, a willingness to acknowledge that we don't know everything, that we're not always right, that we make mistakes.
It's about letting go of that need to be perfect, to have all the answers, to present a certain image to the world.
Exactly. And in that humility and that willingness to let go of our need to be right, there's a possibility for real learning and growth to take place.
It's like we create space for something new to emerge, something more authentic and aligned with our true nature.
Precisely, and that's where the real journey begins, in that space of humility, of open-mindedness, of willingness to let go of the known and embrace the unknown.
Krishnamurti also emphasizes the importance of living in the present moment. He argues that most of our suffering is caused by dwelling on the past or worrying about the future. He even uses this great analogy to illustrate the point. He says, the mind is like a river that's constantly flowing.
Right.
And if we're always clinging to the past or grasping at the future,
Yeah.
we're like someone trying to stand still in the middle of that river.
Yeah.
We're constantly being swept away by the current.
It's such a powerful image, isn't it? And it highlights how futile it is to try to control the flow of life, to resist the natural ebb and flow of experience.
So what's the alternative? How do we stop resisting and start flowing with the river of life?
Well, Krishnamurti suggests that the key is to learn to be present with whatever is happening in this moment,
Yeah.
without resistance or attachment, to simply observe the thoughts, feelings, and sensations that are arising without judgment or the need to change them.
So it's about cultivating a sense of acceptance for what is, rather than constantly striving for something different.
Exactly. And that acceptance doesn't mean resignation or passivity. It's about recognizing that the present moment is all we ever really have, and that by fully embracing it, we open ourselves up to a whole new way of experiencing life.
It's like we're saying yes to life, to all of it, the good and the bad, the pleasant and the unpleasant. And in that radical acceptance, there's a profound sense of peace and liberation.
Exactly. And that peace and liberation is what allows us to truly connect with others, not from a place of need or attachment, but from a place of love and compassion.
Now, you might be thinking, okay, all this sounds great in theory, but how do I actually apply it to my life?
Right.
And Krishnamurti acknowledges that there's no one-size-fits-all answer to that question.
Yeah.
He doesn't offer any techniques or practices or methods to follow,
Right.
because he says the real work is about understanding yourself, your conditioning, your fears, your patterns of thought and behavior.
And that understanding, he suggests, comes through observation, through self-reflection, through being brutally honest with yourself about what's actually going on inside your own mind. It's about becoming an explorer of your inner landscape, a detective of your own consciousness.
And this exploration can be challenging. It's not always easy to look at ourselves honestly, to confront our shadow sides, to acknowledge the ways in which we might be contributing to our own suffering.
Absolutely. It takes courage and a willingness to be vulnerable with ourselves. But Krishnamurti suggests that the rewards are immeasurable because in that self-awareness and that understanding of our own minds lies the key to true freedom.
Krishnamurti also talks about the importance of relationships as a mirror for self-understanding. He says that the way we interact with others often reflects our own inner state. So if we're constantly finding ourselves in conflict with others,
Right.
it might be a sign that we're at war with ourselves.
It's like our relationships become a training ground for practicing those principles of awareness, compassion, and non-judgment that Krishnamurti talks about.
So instead of blaming others for our problems, we can use those challenges as opportunities to learn more about ourselves, to see how our own conditioning and reactivity are playing out in our interactions.
Exactly. And as we become more aware of our own patterns, we can start to make different choices to respond in ways that are more aligned with our values and intentions.
He also emphasizes that true love is not about possession or dependence. It's about seeing the other person clearly, without any projections or expectations.
It's about recognizing the inherent wholeness and beauty in the other person, even in their imperfections.
And that kind of seeing, he says, is only possible when we're free from our own conditioning, from our own need to control or manipulate the other person.
It's about learning to love unconditionally without needing the other person to change or be a certain way.
So it sounds like true love requires a profound level of acceptance, both of ourselves and of the other person.
Exactly. And that acceptance is not about condoning bad behavior or allowing ourselves to be mistreated. It's about recognizing that everyone is doing the best they can with the resources they have, and that true change can only happen from a place of understanding and compassion.
One of the things he emphasizes is that love is not an emotion.
Right.
It's a state of being.
He describes it as a state of choiceless awareness, a state of mind that's completely present with what is without any judgment, resistance, or attachment.
Does that resonate with you?
Absolutely. It speaks to that deep sense of peace that comes from simply being present with what is without trying to change it, without needing it to be different.
It's almost like a surrender to the flow of life, isn't it?
Exactly. And that surrender, that letting go, is what allows us to experience true freedom.
Krishnamurti is also very clear that this kind of transformation, this revolution in consciousness, is not something that can be imposed from the outside. It has to come from within, from each one of us individually taking responsibility for our own thoughts, feelings, and actions.
He's not advocating for a political revolution or a social movement. He's calling for an inner revolution, a transformation of the heart and mind that can only happen on an individual level.
And that's a radical idea, isn't it? In a world that's so focused on external change, on fixing systems and structures. Krishnamurti is reminding us that real change begins ourselves.
He's suggesting that we can't change the world until we change ourselves, and that self-transformation is not about becoming a better person, but about seeing through the illusion of the separate self altogether.
Now, speaking of change, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what Krishnamurti has to say about the concept of right action. He's pretty clear that right action doesn't come from following a set of moral principles or religious doctrines. It comes from a deeper place.
Right action for Krishnamurti arises from understanding. It's about seeing the situation, clearly understanding the consequences of our actions, and acting in a way that's aligned with our deepest values.
So it's not about following rules or trying to be a good person. It's about acting from a place of wisdom and compassion.
Exactly. And that wisdom and compassion can only come from a mind that's free from conditioning, from those ingrained patterns of thought and behavior that often drive our actions.
So how do we cultivate that kind of mind?
Yeah.
How do we become more aware of our conditioning and make choices that are truly aligned with our values?
Well, Krishnamurti emphasizes the importance of self-reflection, of paying attention to our thoughts, feelings, and motivations.
Yes.
It's about asking ourselves, why am I doing this? What is driving my actions? Is this truly aligned with my values? Or am I simply reacting based on my conditioning?
It sounds like it's about becoming more conscious of the choices we're making moment to moment.
Exactly. And that awareness, that conscious choice making is the foundation of right action.
Krishnamurti also speaks extensively about the importance of relationships in our lives, but he's very clear that true relationship is only possible when there's freedom. What does he mean by that?
He's talking about freedom from the need to control freedom, from the fear of rejection, freedom from the burden of the past. He suggests that most of us enter into relationships with a lot of baggage, our expectations, our fears, our past hurts. And that baggage creates a barrier between us and the other person, preventing true intimacy and connection.
It's like we're bringing all our old wounds and insecurities into the relationship and then wondering why things aren't working out.
Exactly. And so Krishnamurti encourages us to approach relationships with a sense of openness and curiosity, to be willing to see the other person as they are without any projections or judgments.
It sounds like it's about letting go of our need to change the other person to make them fit into our mold and instead simply accepting them as they are.
Exactly. And that acceptance doesn't mean condoning bad behavior or allowing ourselves to be mistreated. It's about recognizing that everyone is doing the best they can with the resources they have, and that true change can only happen from a place of understanding and compassion.
He also talks about the importance of communication in relationships, and I think this is a really crucial point. What does Krishnamurti have to say about communication that might be different from how we usually think about it?
He's not just talking about the words we use, but also about the energy we bring to our interactions. He says that true communication can only happen when there's a sense of mutual respect, a willingness to listen deeply, and an openness to understanding the other person's point of view.
It's not just about getting our point across. It's about really listening to and understanding the other person, even if we don't agree with them.
Exactly. And that kind of communication, he says, can be incredibly healing both for ourselves and for our relationships.
So we were talking about communication and how important it is
Yeah.
in relationships.
Right.
And Krishnamurti had a lot to say about how we can improve communication and how we can actually make it really healing.
It all comes down to freedom in relationships. Freedom from the need to control, freedom from fear of rejection, and freedom from the baggage of the past. You know?
Oh, yeah. All that stuff we bring into a relationship.
Exactly. It's like we're carrying around all these old wounds and insecurities and then wondering why things aren't working out.
So true. So how do we approach relationships differently then?
Krishnamurti says we need to come with an open mind and a sense of curiosity, being willing to see the other person for who they truly are without any judgments or projections.
Like meeting them for the first time almost.
Exactly. And it's about letting go of that need to change them, to fit into some kind of mold we have, and instead just accepting them for who they are.
Acceptance. Yeah, that's huge. But it doesn't mean we have to accept bad behavior.
Right. It's not about condoning that. It's more about understanding that everyone is doing the best they can with what they have, and that real change only happens when we come from a place of compassion and understanding.
I love that Krishnamurti also talks about the importance of understanding the nature of duality.
Yes.
Good and bad, right and wrong, pleasure and pain, self and other, and how this kind of thinking actually leads to suffering.
It's like we're constantly dividing the world into these opposing sides and then judging ourselves and others based on where we fall.
It creates so much conflict and separation.
Exactly. But Krishnamurti suggests that duality is really an illusion, a product of our thinking rather than reality.
He says in reality, there's just oneness, wholeness, a
Yeah.
deep interconnectedness.
Yeah, it's like looking at a tapestry and getting caught up in the individual threads instead of seeing the whole beautiful, intricate
He
pattern.
gives the example of a wave,
Oh, yeah.
how it seems separate from the ocean, but it's really just a part of it.
And we're like that too. We appear separate from the world around us, but in reality, we're all interconnected.
That's a powerful image. It makes you realize that what we do to others, we ultimately do to ourselves.
Exactly. And when we really get that, it can be so liberating because it frees us from that fear of being alone, from the need to constantly defend ourselves from the world.
We're all in this together, right?
We are. We're all part of the same human family, and supporting each other is ultimately supporting ourselves.
Now, Krishnamurti was also pretty critical of how we use language.
He said it can actually create a barrier between us and reality because words are just symbols. They're not the things themselves.
So we shouldn't take them so literally.
Exactly. It's like trying to capture the vastness of the ocean in a tiny teacup.
Oh, love that.
Words can only point towards reality. They can't fully grasp it.
He uses the example of the word tree, saying the word tree isn't the actual tree out there. It's just a symbol we use to represent it.
And if we cling too tightly to that symbol, we miss the real thing.
It's like reading the menu, but never actually tasting the food.
Exactly.
So how do we use language more skillfully then?
Krishnamurti suggests being mindful of the limitations of words, not mistaking the symbol for the reality it represents.
It's about using language to communicate and understand, but not letting it block us from having those direct experiences.
Right. It's about getting out of our heads and into our bodies, our senses, into the world, experiencing life firsthand, instead of just living through our thoughts and beliefs.
Now, I know we talked about freedom a lot,
We did.
but Krishnamurti also talks about being religious, and I'm curious to hear your take on what he means by that, because it doesn't seem like he's talking about organized religion.
Not at all. For Krishnamurti, being religious is about a state of being. It's about freedom from all that conditioning and a state of complete inner peace.
It's a whole different way of looking at it.
It is. And he says this state of being isn't something you can force. It happens naturally when we start to see through the illusions of our minds and let go of our attachments, our desires, our fears that need to control everything.
No, it's not about believing in something or following rituals. It's about a real shift in our consciousness.
Yeah, a way of seeing the world with more awareness, compassion, and a deep sense of connection to everything.
And that shift doesn't happen overnight, does it?
It takes time. It's an ongoing process of self-discovery that can unfold over a lifetime.
And this whole journey for Krishnamurti is about looking inward, not searching for something outside ourselves.
He believed that truth is already within us. We just have to uncover it.
And it's not always an easy process, is it?
No, it requires us to be honest with ourselves, to confront those parts of us that we might not like to see, to question everything we think we know.
It's about challenging our beliefs, our
Yeah.
assumptions, our perceptions of the world.
And in that process, there's a lot of potential for growth, for transformation, for real freedom.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into freedom from the known, I think it's important to remember that Krishnamurti wasn't giving us a set of rules to follow or a path to enlightenment. He was pointing to a way of being, a way of living that's rooted in awareness, compassion, and freedom.
A way of life that's available to all of us if we're willing to do the work.
And he was very clear that this way of being isn't something you can achieve through sheer effort or willpower. It emerges naturally when we start to see through those illusions of our minds, when we let go of our attachments and embrace the present moment with open hearts and minds.
It's about finding that freedom that's not tied to our external circumstances, but comes from a deep understanding of our true nature.
It's a journey we all have to take for ourselves. There's no roadmap, no guidebook, no guru who can do it for us.
That's right. It's a solo journey, but we don't have to go it alone. We can support each other along the way.
So I want to leave our listeners with one of Krishnamurti's most powerful questions. Something to think about as you go about your day. He asks, when you are walking alone in the woods, or even just sitting in your living room, can you, with one breath, with one look, know yourself very simply as you are?
It's an invitation to drop all the masks, the pretenses, the stories we create about ourselves, and just be present with our experience, to meet ourselves with honesty and curiosity.
To embrace that mystery of our own being and discover a way of living that's truly free, authentic, and aligned with our deepest truth.
It's a lifelong exploration.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into freedom from the known. Thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
And may Krishnamurti's insights inspire you to continue on your own journey of self-discovery and to live a life filled with freedom, love, and wonder.